Everybody. So for today, we're going to be focusing on the fluid and solute balance in our body. So for the fluid intake, we're going to start talking about basically the water intake and output. You don't really need to know all the percentages and the volumes that are listed on this picture. Basically, what you want to think about is where the water that is present inside your body comes from. You do need to understand that the highest portion comes basically from drinking different type of beverages, including the most common one, which is basically pure water. And then about 30% comes from water, and about 10% is what your metabolism actually makes as a byproduct, which you will learn about more in your next semester's course. When it comes to output, the majority of the water is being lost through urine, followed by release from your skin and lungs, since they are basically opening up to the outside, through either sweat or humidity lost through your lungs. You lose part of it as part of the fecal matter. And sorry, the last part of it you lose as part of the fecal matter. Do remember that these percentages are going to be different depending on the person's diet as well as the health condition. So percentages and the volume will be different, but this is an average numbers we're taking a look at. Now the next thing we're going to look at is the typical solutes that are present inside your bloodstream and the most important functions associated with each. Now to start with this, we're going to look at some of the electrolytes or your ions that are present in the body. There are multiple ones listed, but as you can see, I have only highlighted certain ones, or sorry, I should circle them, circle certain ones, including your sodium, potassium, calcium, bicarbonate, and chloride. The reason for highlighting these is these are some of the main ones that we continuously discuss. They're extremely important for helping you ensure that your body is functioning properly. So let's starting with sodium. If you take a look at sodium, and it should not be new since we have discussed this many times. First of all, to kind of understand the graph, look on the side. You have three columns on this. The red is representing your blood plasma, hence red. The blue is representing interstitial fluid, or IF, which should be very similar to your blood plasma. And then you have interstitial fluid, which is basically what's found inside your cell. Typically, not always, typically what you see is the IF and blood plasma will be very similar and typically opposite of what you will see for the interstitial fluid. Sorry, intercellular fluid, not interstitial, intercellular fluid, or ICF. So starting with sodium, we know that sodium is going to be high inside our extracellular fluid or your blood plasma, which is the red and blue, and it's going to be low inside the cell. Potassium, however, is going to be opposite, where we have low concentration of potassium outside the cell and really high concentration of potassium, which is a yellow bar, inside the cell. So potassium is high inside, sodium is high outside the cell. Calcium is almost non-existent inside inside your cell, and also very low concentration compared to the other two ions, even outside the cell. But in relative terms, calcium is low inside and high outside. Bicarbonate is another one. Remember, this is a buffering system for your body, so you expect to have higher levels of that outside the cell, which is basically your blood plasma and interstitial fluid. And in comparison, you have a lower concentration of bicarbonate inside your cell or within your intercellular fluid. Lastly, chloride is going to be high outside the cell and relatively low chloride inside the cell. Rest are good to know, however, you will not be required to know them for your examination. So we're going to start by looking at calcium. Calcium is extremely important in functionality of your nerves and your cardiac muscle, and in general your muscle contraction. So if you guys remember, we learned about homeostasis and basically maintaining homeostasis through a feedback loop. So in this case, we're looking at calcium and focusing on how the homeostatic feedback loop works for calcium. So if you guys remember, we have the following components. We had a stimulus, you have sensor and or integrator, which creates and releases something we refer to as output. Output has a specific targets, and when output interacts with your targets, it causes certain changes, which we refer to as effects. And all of these effects ends up with a final response, which basically the goal is to reestablish the homeostasis. Now, in this case, calcium is going to be low, and low it means any number below 8.5 milligram per deciliter. Do remember that number, that this is basically the lower part of your error point, and anything below that will cause and act as a stimulus for this whole feedback loop to be initiated. So calcium starts to drop, blood calcium starts to drop below 8.5 milligram per deciliter. This stimulus will be sensed or noticed by your parathyroid gland. Parathyroid gland is located behind or in the posterior aspect of the thyroid gland, which is a butterfly gland right underneath your thyroid cartilage inside around your neck. Now, when your sensor or your integrator, parathyroid gland, notices the drop in blood calcium, it's going to have a release of a hormone called parathyroid hormone, which we usually shorthand to PTH. Now, the target for PTH is three structures. The specific cells in your bone, which we refer to them as osteoclast, your kidneys, and your intestines. Now for this, we'll talk about the effects, but I'm going to use the picture to explain it. But the information that's going to be explained is what you will see under number 1, 2, and 3 for part 5. So here's basically what I'm discussing with you. So let me just start this. So you have hypocalcemia, which basically means low blood calcium. These little circles that you see are your parathyroid hormone. In this case, they're showing you 4, but you can have up to 9 of them. The parathyroid gland starts to produce what? PTH, which is your parathyroid hormone. And it has 3 targets: your bone, more specifically cells called osteoclast, your kidney, and the last part is your intestines. So let's walk through this. What are the effects? When parathyroid hormone is present, there's going to be an increase in osteoclast activity. Osteoclast goal is to break down bone. And if you guys understand, most of the bone would be calcium. So if I break down your bone, what I'm going to be releasing from that bone is the stored calcium that has been stored with phosphate. So breaking down your bone using osteoclast is going to release 2 components, calcium and phosphate. Now, kidney is also another structure that gets affected. So remember, you do remove components such as, you balance ions using your nephrons within your kidneys. So if you have low calcium level in your bloodstream, what you want to do is you want to start to hold on to the calcium. So there is an increase in calcium reabsorption inside your kidney tubules. Now, at the same time, your kidney is also going to start to release a hormone called calcitriol. Okay? And calcitriol has a target, which is your small intestine. So, calcitriol plus PTH is going to target your small intestine, and that causes an increase in calcium absorption, and calcium absorption means more calcium in your bloodstream. So you break down your bone to release calcium. You prevented removal of calcium from your kidney. You start reabsorbing it. And you absorb more from your intestine in the presence of calcitriol. All of these cause a final result you see, which is increase in blood calcium. So again, you're maintaining your homeostatic feedback loop. You started with low calcium and then you work your way up to increase the calcium level. The next thing we have is albumin. Albumin is considered a protein we discuss as part of your blood. It is a blood protein produced by your liver, and it's really important for maintaining the osmotic pressure within your blood vessels. If you guys don't remember what I'm discussing, please go back and review your blood lecture when we talked about plasma and plasma proteins. Now, normally, albumin will be absent in the filtrate because albumin is a protein, and proteins are going to be large that will not be able to be be filtered in your filtrate and eventually be removed. Normally, the lifespan is relatively short, about 12 to 20 days. And they also have a role in transporting material since they have many binding sites. Now, what they actually transport, they transport metals, ions, enzymes, amino acids, hormones. They are playing a role in metabolism and detoxification, and they're also considered to be free radical scavengers, which are really important for basically removing cells or removing components that can cause abnormalities within your cell and that leads to cancer. So albumin is a really important protein for our body. Now, there is a scenario where you basically have either increase or decrease of the albumin levels. If you have an elevation of the albumin, which is typically an infrequent scenario, is associated with your body not basically carrying enough water. So when you're dehydrated, in relation to your water, you will have more albumin, and therefore your albumin level goes up. However, this is easily treated by just basically drinking water, and through rehydration, you return the albumin level back to normal. The other scenario, the other extreme, is decrease in the albumin levels in your bloodstream. This can be the result of problems with your kidneys, where albumin is going to be basically become part of the filtrate and removed inside urine or excreted in urine. You can have liver disease, which basically limits how much albumin is going to be produced, or it could be the result of malnutrition, but you will not have enough amino acids in your diet that allows the protein albumin to be synthesized. All of these three can lead into a lower level of albumin. An individual with low albumin are susceptible to edema because, again, if you guys remember, we talked about this. Because osmotic pressure starts to go down, you become more susceptible to moving water from your bloodstream into your tissue. Water inside your tissue causes swelling of the tissue, which is also known as edema. Now, in African countries or areas where people are malnourished, we actually have a disease called kwashiorkor disease, which is again typical in children, happens in adults also, but basically there is not enough proteins in their diet, and therefore they will not be able to produce albumin. In these individuals, because liver is going to be overworked, liver is going to become very fatty and enlarged, and they also, again, children and individuals with these conditions are going to be susceptible to high retention of water. Okay, I'm going to stop on this PowerPoint and then we'll continue with pH balance in your next presentation.